Welcome to Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast with Melissa Torto.
Welcome to Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast with Melissa Torto. Melissa is a Massachusetts surrogacy and assisted reproduction attorney who helps individuals, couples, and growing families navigate the legal process behind surrogacy, egg donation, and embryo donation. I'm Shameika Rhymes, and today we're looking at the agreement that helps set expectations, protect everyone involved, and shape the foundation of a surrogacy journey before a pregnancy even begins. Welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Melissa, where does the gestational carrier agreement fit into the overall surrogacy timeline?
So it typically falls after a match has been made by the intended parents and the surrogate. So when I say match, I mean that the intended parents and the surrogate or gestational carrier, we can use that phrase interchangeably, they've met in some sort of virtual or in-person capacity. And if they've been matched via an agency, that usually means that the agency has sort of facilitated a call where the intended parents and gestational carrier have met. They have, shared why they're doing surrogacy. They've talked about their values, what's important to them. And then usually that's when a match is made, is after that call. And so then the contract happens a little bit later down the road, typically while the surrogate is undergoing what we call her medical workup at the fertility center, just making sure that medically she's approved to be a surrogate. So that's typically when the contract gets started.
Well, what are the primary goals of a gestational carrier agreement for both the intended parents and the surrogate?
We always just want to memorialize what the parties have already discussed and agreed to. I always say to intended parents when I'm representing them that my job is to not come in and dictate the terms of the contract. I want to know what the intended parents and the surrogate have discussed, and I want to make sure that the contract that I am drafting is implementing those terms. And the same for when I'm representing surrogates. I review, with them, making sure, is this aligned with discussions that you've had with the intended parents and the agency? Because we really want to make sure that everyone is on the same page moving forward.
That makes sense. Well, what kinds of decisions and expectations are usually discussed and finalized before that agreement is signed?
Well, the most hot button topic is typically termination of a pregnancy. And that is one that is a very sensitive topic, and so always needs to be handled very gently. And it really is, we're always starting with the expectation that these are wanted pregnancies. The intended parents are not coming into this process looking to terminate a pregnancy. These are really difficult decisions that are made when an abnormality is typically found via medical testing during the pregnancy. And it is one that involves a lot of different players. The surrogate, has to give her input, medical professionals in the field, if there's an agency involved, the attorneys, we all have, very vital roles in that discussion. But when it comes time for the contract, we want to make sure, did the parties talk about specific things that they would like to terminate a pregnancy for, whether that be something that's a quality of life issue or something that, would be incompatible with life. If the parties have had that discussion, I want to make sure that it is memorialized in the contract to make sure that everyone is on the same page moving forward. Because I've said to clients, both surrogates and intended parents alike, that I would rather the match break now because you realize that you weren't aligned on some of these topics than reach the pregnancy and realize that you really had not had those discussions. And there are some agencies that I work with that don't go into these in-depth discussions, which is also helpful to know, because a lot of these agencies, want to set the expectation that there's so many different kind of abnormalities out there, and we can't pinpoint every single one. But as long as everyone's open to discussing termination for any abnormality, then that's important to know too.
Well, some people assume that these agreements are mostly about compensation or legal protection, but what are some other important areas that are typically covered?
Yeah, pregnancy lifestyle restrictions. Every contract sort of has your very standard no drinking, no smoking, no doing drugs, no doing dangerous activities. And while that seems pretty self-explanatory for what you shouldn't be doing in pregnancy, it is important to sort of outline the expectation that you won't be doing these things, right? It seems very simple, but we do want to make sure that the surrogate is understanding her obligations not to do anything that would be frowned upon in a civilized society for pregnancy. So
Mhm.
that's certainly something that's discussed in the contract, as well as, vaccination preferences. Many surrogates don't want to get the COVID and flu vaccine, which is, a very normal part of this process that is negotiated. But if intended parents feel very strongly about those vaccines and want that in the contract, we want to know that now. So then that way, all of those items can be flushed out before you move forward with an embryo transfer.
That makes sense to be very specific and lay everything
Yeah,
out.
very
So, what
true.
risk can develop if people move forward with unclear expectations or informal agreements instead of a carefully drafted contract?
Then you're going to run into situations where we're in the middle of a pregnancy and something happens and you have not discussed it. And if you're not on the same page, really at the end of the day, it's the surrogate that makes the decisions. And so I think that is something that intended parents rightfully struggle with. As we've mentioned before, it's that balance of, it's the surrogate's body, but it's the intended parent's baby. And at the end of the day, the surrogate does have that body autonomy. So if we have not had that clear boundary setting and expectation setting during the contract phase, and we didn't memorialize what you guys all discussed in the contract, it's going to lead to a significant breakdown of your relationship, which could impact an intended parent's ability to be in the delivery room and be at that crucial moment of birth.
Yeah, wow. Well, surrogacy journeys don't always unfold exactly as expected. So, how do these agreements help everyone navigate those unexpected situations during a pregnancy?
In my experience, resorting to the contract should be your last possible resort because we want to keep the relationship together between the intended parents and the surrogate when they hit a rough patch in their journey. Whether that be the surrogate has said she will get a vaccine and then she won't, or she said she would terminate for X, Y, and Z and then she doesn't, or, she really does not want to undergo an invasive medical test. Really preserving the relationship is paramount. So instead of just throwing the contract back at her and saying, you agreed to do this, you'll be in breach, I always recommend to my clients that's the last approach and should really be the backstop. What you should be doing is if you're working with an agency, working with the agency, working with mental health professionals, doing some sort of regroup call. So you can all be on a call together, pre- preferably via Zoom or some other sort of video modality because it's easier to see people face to face because expressions are important. And during that call, it's really about having that opportunity to talk to one another about where things went awry. I mean, at the end of the day, we do have that contact and we do have that backstop, but just telling a surrogate you're a material breach of the contract and you're not going to get paid anymore is the fastest way to absolutely destroy your relationship and irrevocably damage everything moving forward.
Well, can you share an example of a situation where a strong agreement helped prevent confusion or that it helped everyone move through the process more smoothly?
Yes, I would. One example that springs to mind is in a termination of pregnancy scenario where during the contract process, I was working with the intended parents who had, very specific ideas of what they would terminate a pregnancy for. So we really did a really good job of crafting very expansive language because it's really hard to, as a drafting attorney, it's almost impossible to write a provision in a contract that could encompass every single scenario. I mean, I'm no medical professional, nor do I claim to be one, even though I've watched many episodes of Grey's Anatomy. But it's almost impossible to pinpoint every single abnormality. So we really worked together to really craft this. What I really liked this language that really dived into what their beliefs were. And then, the surrogate had the opportunity to review that provision with her attorney and make sure that she was on the same page with what the intended parents wanted. And she came back and she had a couple of adjustments, but nothing too crazy. And thankfully, we never got to the point of the journey where a termination of pregnancy was necessary. But it gave, I think, my clients some peace of mind that that this was thoughtfully worked through and crafted. So even though at the end of the day, the surrogate does get the final say in those decisions, they know that they did everything that they could to make sure that they were protecting themselves as best as possible.
Wow, what a great story. Well, thank you, Melissa, for breaking this down for us today. This was very informative.
You're very welcome.
Well, that is it for today's episode of Building Families, the Surrogacy Law Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Melissa Torto and her work helping intended parents, surrogates, and donors navigate the legal side of family building, visit lawofficeofmelissaltorto.com. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with someone who might find it helpful.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.